Good morning, everyone. I am sorry for the delay. I am having camera problems with the snow day, so I hope you can hear me. And again, I am sorry we are late. Thor is going to help me go through the slides, so hopefully everyone can see the slides ahead of you. What we're going to talk about today is our end-of-year checklist. We will have a copy of the slides and a video of the presentation that we'll post on our website, and we'll email out to you also along with your SHRM certifications if you need it. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and you'll get a copy of these slides. But if we can get started, Thor, on clicking through, we're going to go through a couple of topics today. The first one is going to be wage issues. So we're going to talk about the minimum wage, the overtime, the handbooks and policies, required notices and acknowledgements, annual evaluations, and then monitoring your workforce. So when I was thinking about what we want to do for a year-end review, there's a million things. So what I was thinking is when we have a snowy day like this, what can we spend our time on, right? When we're putting our HR cap on as to what would be helpful that end of year, what do we look back at for our employees? So the first one is wage issues. New minimum wage on January 1 is almost $16 an hour. Crazy, I know, for some of you who have kids working, but what that means to you as an employer, and sometimes a small employer with long employed workforce, is do you have employees who have been working for you for 15 years who work $16 and who make $16 an hour? Now you're going to add new employees who are going to make $15.92. So we'll talk about audits a little bit later on too. But what you want to keep in mind is minimum wage is now going to go up to $15.92 an hour. Make sure that's clear, and also look at what the rest of your workforce is making as far as their salary. Always want to remember about overtime, time and a half for all work over 40 hours in a work week unless exempt. Now that seems super simple. I can't tell you how often I see that people are still using comp time or saying, okay, well, if you work on this Wednesday to Saturday, take the following Monday off. If your work week is Monday through Sunday and anyone works more than 40 hours in that Monday through Sunday period, they generally are going to get overtime. Okay, so we want to make sure we understand that. So excess of 40 unless they're exempt. Now, exempt is a difficult thing to determine, and the New Jersey state, of course, likes employees to be non-exempt because non-exempt is going to get their overtime. If you have exempt employees and you classify them as exempt, you want to make sure that's proper. So if we classify them as exempt for the next slide, Thor, there's a couple of things we want to look at. First thing is there has to be a salary exception. The salary requirement for exempt employees is now $43,888 a year. If you remember back to last year under Biden, they were going to increase this up to 50K plus. When Trump came in, that stayed at 43. So the salary threshold is still 43,000 for exempt employees. Three types of work covered for properly classified exempt employees. If they're an executive employee, meaning they're your department heads, they're your supervisors who generally have authority to hire, fire, they're directing at least 2 employees, your executive employees are exempt and therefore they don't have to get overtime if they're working more than 40 hours and their salary is over 43,000. Administrative, not every administrative employee you have is going to be exempt. Generally your office manager, right? It's going to be someone who's involved in your general business operations that has independent judgment and discretion. So again, typically what I see for our 50 or less employees is that's your one office manager. And then we've got professional employees, people who have advanced knowledge in a specialized area. That's your paralegals, your accountants, people who have gone to college, gone for extra training in a certain area. Those people can also be exempt. Once your person is exempt and they meet over 43, then they don't have to be provided overtime once they work over 40. Everyone else, once they work more than 40 hours in a work week, they're going to get overtime. Now, remember, in your policies, you can say anyone has to have pre-approval before they work overtime. If they work more than the 40 hours, you've got to pay them. But if they didn't get pre-approval, you can discipline them for that. So we want to make sure we have that in our policies so that we're paying employees the correct amount. Because again, when we get to wage and hour audits, that's a place the state likes to look at. If you've got employees who are regularly clocking in at 8:15, but they're not getting paid till 8:30, right? Or if they're staying late, we want to make sure that that's covered within our compensation for employees. So the next slide, Thor, we've got maintaining accurate time. So when we look at wage and hour audits, what I'm seeing is generally an employee, an unhappy employee, makes a complaint to wage and hour and says, I'm not being paid the correct time. I was terminated and they didn't pay me my vacation. Those are the common ones I'm seeing. If that happens, it goes to wage and hour, and they'll look into and ask you, what's your response, employer? How can you show me that you properly paid your employees? So you need to maintain accurate time and payroll records. It can't be that Susie works 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, right? People take off for lunch, they take breaks, they're late sometimes. You want to make sure you actually have accurate time and payroll records. If you don't, then the employee did, you're going to be held responsible, oftentimes looking back, even for overtime or compensation for that employee for the time worked. So you want to make sure you actually have accurate time records. And again, inconsistencies or misclassifications, if someone is classified as exempt and they shouldn't have been, then they're going to be entitled to all that overtime that they worked every week over 40 hours per week. So you want to make sure you're reviewing your payroll practices regularly to make sure you're in compliance and don't get hit with the wage and hour audit. Next up, we have something that's new is the Diane B. Allen Equal Protection Act that talks about gender disparity. So one of the things I think is a good thing to do at the end of the year is do an audit of who's getting paid what. It shouldn't be that women make more, men make more, certain age makes more, unless you can explain it, right? Like if there's a reason for it, fine. But you want to make sure that you don't just look at your compensation on a piece of paper and it looks like it's showing gender disparity. You want to be able to explain the differences. You want to document, how did you make your decision? How did you decide who to promote? How did you decide what salary was appropriate for this person and not the other? If it's for seniority, if it's for merit, if it's for performance, fine, just document it so that you can show that that's the reason. Equal Pay Act says equal genders, all genders have to be paid substantially the same for substantially similar work. So if everyone, for example, just take a physical therapist, if all your physical therapists have the same amount of schooling and were hired on the same date, they should be paid approximately the same unless you can show seniority, merit, performance reason for that exception, right? And under that new Diane, well, not new, but a couple years ago, Diane B. Allen EPA, the employee, if an employee files a claim and argues that they are being unlawfully paid and it's because of their gender, they only not get damages for the year. They go back 6 years and anything they should have gotten. So it's an important thing to audit your wage and hour. Look at what your employees are being paid. Make sure that it's not based on any discriminatory reason. And again, a good way to do it is just print it out on paper, take a look at it end of each year, and make sure there's nothing that's glaring, any red flags. And if there are, again, make sure that you explain why they are and document it now so that when you call me and say, oh no, I have an audit, you can explain to me why the differences are there. Raises. So oftentimes employers, just as a matter of routine, right? January 1, people get a raise. So I have a couple of thoughts for you on this one. So why, right? If it's your general practice, people do a good job, they get a cost of living increase at 2%. Okay. Is it a standard amount though? Is it $2,000 per employee? Is it a percentage? And again, keep in mind what I just told you about the gender differences. And do you have a written policy on raises, right? Is it shall be considered, shall be a cost of living? Anytime you have the word shall makes me nervous generally in policies because you want to have discretion there. If you have a really bad year, if a tariff that you didn't foresee coming kills your business operations and you can't afford those raises, you want to make sure you have that discretion within your personnel policies and handbook. Does that raise procedure apply the same to everyone? And is it performance review? So my argument is always no one should get a raise until they have a performance review. And I think performance review should be annually at the minimum. Now I know that's coming from me and I'm not the one who's sitting there juggling 50 balls, but you can do self-evaluation, something to make sure that you have a performance review prior to your employees getting raises. Oftentimes what unfortunately happens is everyone gives the 2% each year. You've got 20 employees. Now this one employee has been giving you trouble, but you just give him the 2% each year. And now you terminate him for poor performance. And he says, well, how was I supposed to know I was performing poorly? Look, I got the same raise as everyone else each year, right? How was I to know? This wasn't because of this. It was because of my protected category, right? So you want to make sure you're documenting why you're giving the raises and you want to have a policy on it. Again, with your discretion so that you can make changes as you see fit. Next slide, we're going to talk about is bonuses. It's almost the same idea, right? Why are you giving bonuses? Again, you want discretion. You don't want it to be a standard percentage unless is it based on a certain department? If it's on sales, is it based on new clients? When you have bonus documents, I can't stress enough how important it is for that bonus commission structure to be in writing and clear. Right? What's clear to you, and again, I think you should look at this yearly because what's clear to you at the beginning might look different 2 years down the road, right? And for a person who's not within your business, will they understand what this bonus structure is so that when you say employee is entitled to a 20% bonus on all amounts collected over $300,000. Does that mean money's collected as of December 31 of each calendar year, right? Our bonus is paid only if employed at the time of the eligibility for the bonus and the time the monies are collected. When you are writing out your bonus spreadsheet, your document on that, you want to make sure it's really clear as to what the policy it is and what it's based upon. And again, discretion, right? Again, if the company's having a bad year, maybe, yes, you did promise them a certain percentage, but if it's also tied into company performance, that might be helpful. Whatever it is, you want to make sure you're protecting yourself while at the same time, of course, employees, if it's in some cases, employees rely on their bonus more than their salary. And if that's the case, particularly, you want to make sure that's clearly spelled out. So when we talk about handbooks and policies, which is our next area, there's a couple of reasons you always want to have them. And the first one is communication, right? So I always say your good employees want to have a handbook. They want to have clear policies so they understand the rules of the game. They should be clear. It should be consistent, right? You want to be consistent in everything you do as an employer. You can't be, but you can strive to be, right? And I always say no good deed goes unpunished. Your handbooks keep you to your policies too, right? So that if someone is late to work 12 days and your policy says after so many days something happens, you have to follow that for each employee so everyone's treated fairly. And you're also, when you have a clear personnel policy or employee handbook, you're enforcing and making clear what the legal rights are. And we're going to talk about some specific policies that you should have. Employees can have a document to go to, and we have in the employee handbooks. Of course, it doesn't cover everything, but it gives them a good place to go and a good place to start. And also it leads to better results for you as a business and hopefully for your bottom line, because once employees know what they're supposed to be doing, hopefully they're better able to service the customers. When we look at the next point, it's why are they important to have? Again, it's the fairness. You provide advance notice. Now, we're always going to have in our handbook that it's subject to change at any time for any reason without advance notice, but most of it's going to be there and going to be laid out for people and for all employees to look at. And again, it's those objective criteria that they need to be uniformly applied to everyone, all employees fairly. And again, it helps not only the employees know, but you as the employer know that these are the rules of the game and you're going to treat everyone the same. Key policies I think you must have. Employee handbook should be reviewed yearly. I know that's not always possible, so at least every 2 years. The reason you want to look at it yearly is oftentimes there's a change. So whether it's the LAD adds a new protected clarification, whether breastfeeding is now protected, there's different changes in your insurance benefits that are in your handbook, different things like that. So it's always a good idea to review annually. But I think this year particularly, these are the 5 things I would make sure you're hitting based upon what I'm seeing. The first is the at-will disclaimer. Super simple, but it needs to be bold, bright, big language, and we can go to the next slide, Thor, that says that this handbook is not a guarantee of employment, right? Because that isn't a guarantee. What it is, it's the rules of the game. So you're wanting to make sure to inform employees there's no right to continued employment. Employment's at will, right? Meaning employment can be terminated for any reason or no reason at all, as long as it's not for a discriminatory reason. Your handbook isn't a contract. It must be clear. And when I say clear, case law tells us it must be bold, all caps, right? Center of the page. So you want to make sure that's within all parts of your handbook, not only on that first page, but on the acknowledgement at the end. So that's a simple one. Your at-will disclaimer to check off their list, make sure you've got it in your handbook. Next is anti-harassment policies. What you want to confirm is that you have a commitment to preventing and correcting illegal harassment, right? So you're going to define what harassment is, and typically we have at least a separate portion or maybe even a separate policy on sexual harassment, identifying what it is, preventing it, prohibiting it within the workplace. You need to have a complaint or a reporting mechanism. We need to know who to go to so we can document that. Employee training, right? So we're going to tell employees that we are going to train them so they understand what harassment is, because a big problem is employees think that if their supervisor's mean to them, that's harassment. And we know that's not the case, right? It has to be based upon a protected characteristic. So it can't be they're mean, but if it's they're mean to you because of your disability, they're mean to you because of your sexuality, then that's another issue. So that's why we want to make sure employees are trained. And again, you want to have that acknowledgement. Now, the reason this is all so important is if you get sued, you want to make sure that you've got a policy, you've got training, and you had a reasonable complaint procedure. And if so, it helps you provide a defense if you get sued, right? It helps you show the court or jury, whoever it may be, that, listen, we had a policy, it was reasonable, they failed to use it. So therefore, this person shouldn't be able to proceed with a harassment suit against us. Disabilities accommodations is another area I want to make sure you have a good policy in your handbook. This is one area that's changed within the last couple of years. We've always, but the last 5 years, pregnancy breastfeeding has been clear as a protected category in New Jersey. We've now got a federal act that includes the pregnancy protections. So we're seeing changes in the handbook from a federal as well as a state perspective. But again, I don't think it's anything you're changing if I've done your handbook the last couple of years, because we've already included pregnancy, we've already included breastfeeding, but you want to make sure that that's in the same area as disability, because what we need to do is provide reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals with a disability, and same thing with the breastfeeding or childbirth. So what does that mean? That means if anyone has a real disability, if they have a perception of a disability, if they have a record of a disability, and it can mean anything. We always say we're in the state of New Jersey, right? If someone has a broken leg, that's not a disability. But if someone has a broken wrist that prevents them from being able to type for an extended period of time because it's some sort of chronic condition, that might be another story, right? So if we have something that's either, or even if it is a broken leg, but someone treats them like this is a chronic condition, that can be enough to qualify as a disability in the state. Once we as an employer know or should know that someone is disabled, we have to engage in an interactive discussion to see what sort of reasonable accommodations are available, right? That person always needs to be able to perform the essential functions of their job, which is why job descriptions are always important, always good to look at annually also. Your job description should say what the essential functions are. So when someone comes to you and says, I need an accommodation, what we often do is say, here's your job description, here's a form, bring it to your doctor. Can you meet the essential functions of your job in this job description with or without reasonable accommodations, right? That is that interactive process that you as the employer have to go through with each employee who tells you they need an accommodation. And that's in accordance with not only the New Jersey law against discrimination, but also the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's really clear. Of course, I want you to document all of this when you have disability accommodations. So if we go to the next slide, if an employee feels he needs to be accommodated, do they have to make it in writing? No. Can you have in your policy that you should request in writing? Absolutely, right? That makes it easier. Here's what I want, here's why. But again, you should have a policy, you can request it in writing, and you should have a disability, we call it an ADA form, handy, so that when someone comes to you, says I need an accommodation, says I need some time off from work, says I need to work remotely, here's your job description, here's the form, go bring it to your doctor, let's see what we can have as far as this interactive discussion is, right? Because we need to be, again, we've talked about uniformity and consistency, but if it poses an undue hardship to you, meaning it costs too much money, meaning they're a secretary and they need to be president, they can't do it remotely, right? Those things, as long as it's in the job description and you can't actually accommodate that because it's unreasonable, that's okay. We just want to be able to document that appropriately. The other thing you want to make sure that's in your handbook is your complaint procedure. So what we want to make sure is that all employees know acts or incidents of unlawful harassment, discrimination need to be reported immediately, right? Companies going to promptly investigate. So prompt and impartial are important for investigations. An investigation can mean a lot of things. There's investigations where someone complains that someone changed the height of their stool, right? You talk to them, you talk to the person who did it, that's your investigation. There might be instead be a history of someone calling someone racially derogatory names, right, over a course of 2 years. That will then require you to interview several different employees, a more thorough report, and a lot more work for you. So those investigations can be very simple and quick, or it could be very thought out, could have me or some other counsel involved. So, but we do have an obligation to investigate. What we also want to make sure is clear in the complaint procedures is there's no retaliation for anyone who in good faith reports an allegation or a complaint of harassment discrimination, right? So no retaliation. When we get to monitoring at the end, that's where we want to make sure that comes in. So if an employee believes they're being harassed, what should they do? That's what needs to be in your handbook. And when we look in your handbook each year, your policies that are important is your complaint procedure. We want employees to say, was it harassment? Was it unwelcome, severe, pervasive, or offensive to a reasonable person? That's hard for people to tell sometimes, right? But what we're telling them is, listen, if it's a one-off comment and you feel comfortable going to that person, do it, right? You don't have to come to HR and say, I don't like the way he talked to me today. If everything's been fine for the previous 6 years and they made one comment, like, go talk to that person. If you want to come tell us too, that's fine, but we're saying you can do that. So on our next slide, we have, if you're not comfortable going to them, what do we need to do? We need to identify who to report to, right? And that's usually our HR or your director or your supervisor, right? Who do you report a complaint of harassment discrimination too. And it can never be just one person or one title, because what if that's the person you're complaining about? We need to have a second person to receive the complaints. And now I know there's a lot of companies out there that only have 4 employees, and the supervisor, the director, the president, HR hat is all worn by the owner of the company, and there's other family members present, right? It is what it is. You have to identify one person, and if you can identify another to receive complaints because you have enough employees, we do that. You want to identify the name and the position. Again, when you go through your yearly, if you said go to Sally Jones and Sally Jones hasn't been in the company for 3 years, get that out of your handbook and make sure you put in the title of the new HR, or just call HR director, whoever it may be. Again, you can request the complaint be in writing, but you cannot require it. An employee doesn't have to put it in writing. You can put it in writing, and you should put it in writing. I know some people like to say, here's what I think you're complaining about, sign off. I don't know if that's necessary, but you should absolutely document when the complaint was made and how you addressed it. And you have this employee complaint form, and even you fill it out with them, right? They come in, you say, okay, if you're not going to complete the form, I'm going to complete it for you so that it leads my investigation. I know what to look for. Make sure you're documenting your complaint, the investigation, and then what you did after the investigation to be able to show that you used, that you sufficiently investigated it and took appropriate action if necessary. Next up is our New Jersey paid sick leave. A lot of people still aren't doing this, so that's why I want to remind you, if you're doing it, great. 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. In New Jersey, all employees, part-time employees, seasonal employees, right? Anyone who works 30 hours gets 1 hour of paid sick leave. All employees it applies to. Your maximum is 40 hours per year, but you as an employer can allow more, but you don't need to. So under New Jersey paid sick leave, 40 hours per year. Now, sick leave, under New Jersey paid sick leave, I always say for those 40 hours, I don't even want to know what it's for, because here's what it can be for: care of your own physical or mental illness, cared for a loved one's physical or mental illness, wellness care, your regular doctor's appointment, domestic violence. Here's the one that I think this is why I don't want to know: attending a child's school-related meeting, conference, or event when requested by the school. So if they want to go to the Christmas, the special Christmas show for their 2nd grader, they were requested by the school, New Jersey paid sick leave, take your 40 hours. I know that I can't look into that, right? Once you reach that 40 hours, now it's different, and I want to know more information, perhaps, right? And then the last reason for New Jersey paid sick leave is if there's a health emergency, a quarantine, right? So during COVID. So what New Jersey paid sick leave provides for also is a 120-day working period, right? So people start accruing it immediately. So that's the next slide, Thor, please. Immediately after employment, if you work 30 hours, you get 1 hour paid sick leave. However, you can make them wait 4 months before using it, right? You don't have to, but your policy should be clear. This is why it needs to be a written policy. Also, what needs to be included in your policy is, do you front load the time or is it accrued? A lot of bookkeepers don't like, after 31, after 31, after 31, max at 40. So what you can do instead is front load all 40 hours at the beginning of the year. If you do that, it's easier from a bookkeeper perspective, I get, but also understand if that person leaves in February and they used all 40 days, there's nothing you're going to do to get that back. So your policy should either state whether, so say it's, we're at the end of the year here, make sure your policy says, can employees carry over that sick leave, or is it paid at the end of the year? Now, what we say is you can only, what the law says, you can only carry over 40 hours per year. And you're going to say to me, well, why do I want to carry 40 hours per year when it says you can only use 40 hours per year? The reason is if you are requiring a payout at the end of the year. So come January 1, an employee doesn't have any paid sick leave. If they carry it over, they'll have that paid sick leave available on January 1. So again, you want to make sure it's super clear in your policy. What's your calendar year? Is it carried over? Do we have a waiting period? And when is it accrued? Next thing, I don't think you need to have this yet, but I know it's just such a big issue. I wanted to hit on it real quickly, is AI policies. I think we're getting to the point that everyone should have some sort of general AI usage policy, even if it's just, you're allowed to use it, but you need to maintain confidentiality. And here's where you can use it, right? And I don't pretend to be an expert. And if any of you are members of the Sussex County Chamber of Commerce, there's actually a panel on this that I'm part of tomorrow morning, because this is such a big issue, right? So what can be used and when? So there's chat GPTs, there's a Meta, right? There's all kinds of different things that you can utilize for your AI usage. Tell your employees what they can use. Now, this one might change every 3 months for the next couple of years, right? I don't know. But what can they use? We want to make sure employees understand we don't know who owns this AI content, right? What we don't want is your employees using AI, downloading all of your company information, and now that's out there for everyone to look at, right? So explain to them the security and privacy concerns. And also, people can't rely on AI like it's the truth, right? There is false information that exists. You put it in there, it's a helpful starting point, but we don't want our employees to utilize AI and then provide poor quality work products. That's why we want to make sure employees understand that and have that clear in our AI policy. So for the next slide, excuse me, what I want to make sure is in your policy at this point is AI use allowed? Maybe you don't allow it. Probably it's like when cell phones started, right? We told everybody, don't use your cell phones. You can't use them at work. You can't have them with you. Now, is there any company that can really say that you're not allowed to use your cell phone at work? Some try, right? But it's very hard. And I think that's what's going to happen with AI. Maybe some companies are going to be slow to roll around, but it is increasing effectiveness. It is a modern way to help your business, likely. So are you going to allow it? Now, you're going to require business emails to create an account, right? Because an account has to be created and you want to make sure personal and work is separate in the AI community. And then no proprietary or confidential information may be entered into AI. I think that's probably the most important thing to keep in your policy now, so that you advise your employees, listen, you're not going to download our numbers into this AI search engine so it's out there. And if they do it, because it's in your policy, you then have the option to impose disciplinary action, and you want to train on employees so they understand the AI policy. So that's a real quick hit on AI, but I would consider whether you want to include that this year or think about it for next year, or at least start the discussion with your employees so you know what your rules and guidelines are going to be as far as AI use, and particularly regarding your confidential information. So next are some additional policies, I think, based upon the questions I've been getting this year with different clients: vacation time and PTO. Next slide, please, Laura. Vacation time is a big one in that, does it carry over? Is it paid out at termination, right? What happens when you don't have any left? I think you need to be clear if you're going to pay it out or not. At termination, if you do say it's payable at termination, please put in there only if leaving in good circumstances, right? Or not for bad faith conduct, not for poor performance, because there's nothing worse than terminating an employee and then having to pay him for 4 weeks of vacation, right? So make sure that's clear within your vacation and PTO policies. Leave policies, it's still super confusing, right? About family leave, family medical leave, family leave insurance. So make sure those are all clear within your handbook too. We could spend hours just talking about that, I know, and we have. So if you have questions about that, let me know. Email and internet use, I think that goes to the AI policy. Again, you want to think about what you want to do there. Drug, alcohol use and testing. I know some handbooks still have in there that if anyone tests positive for cannabis, that is a terminable offense. Now, remember, in New Jersey, recreational use is permitted. So therefore, before you can take any disciplinary action for someone who tests positive for marijuana, you need to have a reasonable suspicion observed behavior report completed. So anything about drug, alcohol use and testing, make sure it's updated so that you've got those reportings done and you're not terminating based upon just cannabis in the system, because cannabis in the system doesn't really mean anything. And if you do terminate someone just for testing positive and it's not a safety sensitive position, you're going to get in trouble for that. Dress code, smoking, company driving, not using your phone while company driving. Those are standards of conduct that I've seen a lot of this year. And again, the hours and overtime we talked about, make sure there's pre-approval and make sure people aren't working more than 40 hours and not getting compensated for overtime. And then finally, performance reviews. If you have a policy that says you shall have an annual performance review, make sure you're doing it. If it says May, whatever it says in your handbook, make sure it's actually what you're doing. Because those handbooks, again, are going to be living documents. And because it's a living document, you want to review your handbook annually and you want to obtain the acknowledgements annually. So what that means is that very end where the employee says, I understand my employment's at will, I've read and I agree to comply with my handbook, right? We want to have people sign off on that every year. And you want to say, well, I have it on my intranet. It's there. It's fine. Everyone knows it's there. Why do I have to have them acknowledge it? The reason is if an employee files a claim against you and says you're discriminated against them, it's very helpful for me as your counsel to say to that employee, is this the acknowledgement that you signed? And this is the acknowledgement you signed the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before. And every time within that was a complaint policy and was an anti-discrimination policy. So you knew if you felt like you were being discriminated against, this is what you were supposed to do, but you didn't do it, right? So that's why it's so important, because without that, we can't show that annual acknowledgement that that employee was made aware of it. One final thing that I think is super important, please check your insurance coverage every year, end of the year, start of the year. EPLI, Employment Practices Liability Insurance, I think is more important than ever. We can't stop anyone from suing you. You can have the best handbook in the world, you can do your trainings, you can do everything right, but if an employee is let go and they decide to sue you, we can't stop that. So there's going to be a huge cost just to get to the point where we can get summary judgment, hopefully for you, right? And you're looking at probably, easy $50,000, $100,000. So employment practices liability insurance covers you for those harassment discrimination claims. There's all kinds of coverages and amounts, deductibles, and you're going to have to rely on your agent to help you. But understand that from employment claims, really quickly, it's what's your salary, times it by 3, add 100,000 for emotional damages, add 100,000 for attorney's fees, and you can see how you get up to $500,000 pretty quickly. So look into your employment practices liability insurance to make sure you have what you need so that if you're sued, that it can be covered by your insurance. So here's more of some old school checklists that I think are important to go through depending on the size of your company. So the first thing is notices that need to be posted. Most of these are taken care of each year by that giant laminated poster everyone has hanging in their break room, right? And that's because the law said it has to be a conspicuous area. And oftentimes it should be made available electronically. So that intranet, if you don't have an intranet, email it to everyone at the beginning of the year, right? And save that email. So the first one is law against discrimination, right? And so that one, if you have one that's 10 years old, you should get a new one because it's not going to include things like pregnancy and breastfeeding, most likely. Everything else is probably the same, but under New Jersey law against discrimination, those are the things that were added. New Jersey earned sick leave, again, new within the last couple of years, so you want to make sure that's within your notices to be posted. Minimum wage and overtime is required to be posted. Your SEPA or your Whistleblower Act is another posting that's required. It's only required if you have 10 or more employees, but what SEPA says is that you as the employer can't retaliate against an employee for voicing what they think is a violation of a policy, rule, or regulation, right? So I don't think that's a bad thing to necessarily have, but understand it's only required if you have 10 or more employees. New Jersey SAFE Act is for domestic violence. Victims of domestic violence are entitled to additional leave time to take care of themselves based upon that activity. Again, if you have 25 or more employees, that applies to you and you're required to post that notice. New Jersey Family Leave Act requires, again, just leave, not payment, and that's required 30 or more employees, which is different than our federal. So if you don't have the state poster, the Federal Family Medical Leave Act only applies if you have 50 or more employees. But again, New Jersey is 30 or more, and that's the one that's providing that 12 weeks of leave, job-protected leave, for family leave reasons. Different than family leave insurance, which provides pay but not job protection. And then finally, there's a gender equity notice. If you have 50 or more employees, that needs to be not only posted, but individually handed out. So those are the things that you should have up each year, double check. And then the next slide is going to be the written notices that you need to distribute each year. So earned sick leave at hire, and then anytime there are updates to your earned sick leave notice, make sure that's provided. Again, hand it out to people. Anything that's handed out, unless you can prove it, which you probably can't, I'd ask for an acknowledgement, right? Just confirm receipt of or have them sign the copy. They keep one, you keep one. Family leave insurance. Again, this one, it's basically the same as disability leave, but often with acknowledgement, you want to make sure you hand out your family leave notice so people understand they're entitled to this, and then keep a copy for your records. Same thing with unemployment compensation. At the time they're separated, make sure you send it. If it's at the time of separation, you're probably not going to get them to sign it, but you keep a copy within your records to show you sent it. SEPA notice on the form on the state's website, they have one that has a little acknowledgement paragraph, again, 10 or more. If you have a large portion of your workforce that speaks another language, you can also get that on the website and should provide that in the primary language of those employees. And same thing, gender equity notice, annually or on request, needs to be acknowledged, distributed. So you want to make sure you get that, a copy of that also. So acknowledgements required on SEPA, gender equity. Earned sick leave isn't required, but I'd recommend that. The handbook receipt, again, not required, but I want you to get that handbook acknowledgement annually if you can, because I think it helps defend the fact that you have these policies and you're serious about them. And you want to make sure employees are aware of them. How do you make sure they're aware of them? I hand them out to you and I have you signing off that, yes, I handed them out to you. And then also training. If you're providing trainings, make sure you have a sign-in sheet that has all the people who attended, whether it's harassment training, OSHA, whatever it may be, so that we can show, yes, you were there. So an employee can't say at the time they're suing you, oh, I didn't go to that. Well, here's your name on this mandatory training. Here's a sign-in sheet. Isn't it true Susie, Tom, and Joe signed it? You did too, right? We want to make sure that's there. Finally, why do you want those acknowledgement? It protects you in disputes. Again, if someone's claiming discrimination, harassment, retaliation, we want to be able to show they knew the policy was there or that they should have. They signed off on it. So that employee was informed of it. It reduced your risk of penalties for noncompliance. And again, it strengthens your documentation at HR. And again, for each employee, you should have 2 folders, right? One is going to be all these things we're talking about, all these written documents. And the second one is going to be their confidential medical information. You want to make sure you're always keeping that separate. When we talk about annual evaluations specifically, we do think they're important because it improves your performance, hopefully, right, of each individual as well as the team. We hope that it increases engagement, right, that they're being evaluated so people know that you care. It identifies training needs too. Listen, if someone says to you, I can't do this because, or I don't know how to do this, right, that's there. And the goal is also to improve loyalty to the company, right, so that people understand your care and you're vested in them. And that you have opportunities for promotion, right? By evaluating you, we're determining what the next role is for you, if that's something you want. So how do you conduct those annual evaluations? You want to be prepared ahead of time, right? You review the prior review, even if it's a self-evaluation. Look at what they commented on last year versus this year. Look at notes made throughout the year. You want to train all of your supervisors to document, even if it's for this reason, right? So they can say at the end of the year, here's 3 things that were good I noticed, here's 2 things you can work on, whatever it may be, right? Whether there's goals, accomplishments, additional responsibilities, that should be in there. Again, take out your job description. Take a look at that. How does their progress, how does their work performance compare to that job description? And you want to make sure you're prepared ahead of time to communicate certain things, right? If this employee has attendance issues, if this employee is being considered for a promotion, but they have something to work on, you want to make sure that's discussed during those evaluations. So the next thing is how to conduct it. Again, you want to be super clear and concise, right? That's why people often use forms with the 1 to 5 grading system. I don't know that you need to, you can. Examples of strengths, right? And again, if you're giving someone a raise, yes, you're identifying their strengths, but everyone has something they can work on, and you want to make sure that's clear on there. Specific examples, and if someone did an awesome job, tell them they did an awesome job. People love to hear that, right? Opportunities for growth. What's one area that they can improve on? Is there training, or how do they obtain that next step? And again, make sure it's actionable so we can work on the improvement right away. So if it's something, I don't want you to use the annual evaluation in lieu of a PIP, a performance improvement plan, right? If someone is not performing well enough to the extent that they need to go on a performance improvement plan, that's not something for the annual evaluation. That should be handled right when that issue arises, right? So it should be throughout the year instead of, you don't need to wait till the end of the year to do that. So the next thing is you want to review the evaluation with the employee, right? So how you do that is you meet with the employee. So typically it's going to be the direct report as well as an HR representative, so that you have 2 witnesses on behalf of the employer. And you want to make sure you discuss that review. You go through the written review, explain what the weaknesses are, what the strengths are. You identify specific results. I think it's the next slide, Thor, so that people understand the goals they've achieved. If they don't have the job description, good time to take it out again. Like, look, this is what we're looking at. This is what we want you to be doing as a productive member of our team. We want to make sure that you understand we need you to be able to do these things. And if that means you need additional training, if that means you need some coursework, whatever it may be. And again, specific results that they've achieved. Any obstacles, right? If someone had extended absences, that was a reason for their problems. Or if someone wasn't able to figure out one part of their job, you want to make sure that's clear within the evaluation. And if their goal for next year is to do something differently. And oftentimes it's not measurable, right? Sometimes they're just not communicating well with team members, or, they don't have a positive attitude, things like that. Again, to the extent, the next one talks about, SMART goals, right? They're specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. Those aren't always easy to come up with. So that's why you want to make sure you have this prepared ahead of time so that you can explain to the employee what you expect from them. Put that in that annual review and have them be able to achieve that the next year. And they should not be the same for everyone. I cannot tell you how common it is for someone to come into me and say they have an employee, they've been terrible for the last 3 years, and they've decided they're finally going to let them go. Oh, and they told me last week they're pregnant, right? That can't be the case, because if you're having those annual evaluations, hopefully it shows in there how have they been a terrible employee the last 5 years, right? failing to communicate. And sometimes people just aren't a good fit. That's why we say you hire slow and you fire fast. If someone comes in and they're not a good fit and they are a problem and cancer to your workforce, that's okay. If that's the reason, don't let it fester. Don't let it sit until it becomes a protected category, right? Because of their gender, religion, their age, any of those protected categories can't be the reason for an employment decision. So how do the evaluations help you as an employer? Is everyone has something they can work on again, and we're going to put that in there. And you want that evaluation before you do an increase in pay. Remember, we talked about that earlier, is what is your criteria for an increase in pay? Is it something that's standard in a policy? Is it based upon performance? Is it based upon that performance review? So I know a lot of companies have, if you get an 85 or higher or 95 or higher, that determines the percentage increase. Okay, then make sure that what you're using for the criteria is also fair and equitable to everybody also, right? So one thing that I see as a problem often in these older forms is we used to say employees who weren't absent any days during the year, right, would get 5 points. And if you were absent 5 or more days, 3 points, right, or whatever it is. So now we know under the New Jersey paid sick leave law, everyone gets 40 hours, 1 week of paid sick leave, right? You cannot discriminate, treat anyone differently because of their use of that paid sick leave. So if you have within your annual evaluation that if they have been absent 3 weeks, 3 days, that's a negative indicator, it can't be anymore. You can't have any negative indicators, I'd argue, until you go after 2 weeks at this point, right? But after 48 hours, absolutely, because 40 hours is what everyone is entitled to in the New Jersey paid sick leave law. So if you have anything in there about perfect attendance, even if you give a bonus, right? Perfect attendance bonus that people get, can't do it anymore, because if someone was out only because they have a legitimate illness, they can't be suffering an adverse employment action because of that legitimate illness. Now, if you want to give out an award and it's a little paper certificate, maybe that's okay. But I don't even know if that is. What I do know is if it's tied to compensation, no longer acceptable. And again, performance issues always need to be documented, right? We want to make sure it's super clear in there what we're looking for. And again, if it's a PIP, that's not something that should be part of your annual evaluation. That should be a separate document in a separate meeting so that people understand how serious a PIP is and the performance that needs to get better. Last topic I want to hit on today is monitoring your workforce, because oftentimes at the end of the year, people will say, well, we don't know how to make sure the direction. We don't know how people feel. So what's the employee's productivity, right? Can you look at reports towards the end of the year? And of course we all can, right? We all can produce reports that show whether it's billable hours, whether it's the number of products provided, whether it's the amount of sales, right? What's your productivity within the workplace? You want to look at that on an annual basis. And we want to look at our compensation, what we talked about earlier. Just print out by category, what are your employees, what's their salary, what's their bonuses, so you can make sure there's no red flags that someone can use as their golden piece of paper to show, oh, look, this is discriminatory. It's clear as day right on this piece of paper if you see the compensation provided to the women versus the men at this company. And of course, there's also employee satisfaction. How do you tell if employees are happy, and do you care, and how do you care, and why do you care, right? So you care because people who are happy generally stay with you, so you're not paying hiring, rehiring costs, and you're also going to have more productive employees if they're satisfied with you. So how do you tell? And that's where you as HR individuals are often involved in that, right? Like, are you doing surveys? Are you having different committees, your health and wellness, marketing? Do you have, gatherings, whatever it is that helps your employee satisfaction? And then finally, going back to the other slide for a minute, employee concerns and complaints are an important part of employee monitoring. So if you had to investigate concerns of harassment or discrimination, I think you absolutely need to follow up with some sort of survey as to whether there are employee concerns and complaints at least within that next year, right? Excuse me. Because if you had to investigate concerns of harassment and discrimination, and while you were investigating, you determined that other people had heard that or thought that, you want to be able to show in the future that you made sure those concerns and complaints didn't exist again. And how? The way you can do that is many different ways, right? So it can be one-on-one meetings, and that's the next slide. One-on-one meetings, right? Where you meet with everyone. How's it going? How's your performance this year? Any concerns or complaints, right? I recognize that's lengthy and can go off board quickly, but that's an option. Group meetings, I don't particularly like because I don't let people feel comfortable speaking out, but it could at least be an introduction that like, this is what we want. We want you guys to tell us if you have concerns, come see me in the next week if you are, right? Can be anytime, but particularly in the next week. Trainings, right? If employees are trained on harassment and discrimination, again, it's going to be helpful for you in defense of any litigation, but also that will help get your determination as to satisfaction. So I often do trainings, harassment and discrimination trainings. So I'll go in and just this year it was to an employer and I did 4 trainings in one day. Exactly the same workforce. It wasn't like one group or another. It was, a couple people from each different department at one time. My first training, no one says a peep, right? They listen to me, I think, right? I'm trying to make my eye contact. I think they're hearing me, but I don't know. The second one, I didn't get to my second slide and they had questions about harassment and questions about discrimination and, feedback. And it's a great group for no reason other than it just happened to be, right? Not, again, because it's one category or another. Then I get to my third group, which you always have, and there's the person in the back of the room who's like, Bob does that, Susie does that, right? And saying inappropriate things. And then you get to the fourth group and they're quiet again, right? You never know how these group trainings are going to go, but it taught me a lot, right? I learned a lot sitting there. I learned that one group has a lot of questions because they didn't know what harassment was versus bullying, right? And they didn't know what was unlawful and they didn't know who to go to. And then that third group, when they were talking about Bob needs to be looked at, right? If every single person in that room is finding it funny, that's the one thing where if people find it funny for 5 years and then on the 6th year they don't find it funny, that really doesn't protect you as the employer if it was inappropriate the whole time, right? So we want to make sure we're monitoring that in every different way. Surveys. So I am not computer literate, given the fact that I can't even get my camera on today. That's clear. But I figured out how to do a Survey Monkey for the Booster Club, right? A Survey Monkey is super easy. And it's a great way to get anonymous feedback from people if they want as to many issues going on within the workplace. So if you've had harassment, discrimination complaints within the last year, it's a great simple way to set out a survey, any complaints people have. And then there's the old school tissue box converted into a complaint box. It's okay. If that works for you and that works for your employees, that might be a way to monitor too. As long as you tell everyone, we have a complaint box. It's in front of HR. If anyone has concerns they want to do, stick them there. Now, the question becomes, now people have made anonymous complaints. How do I investigate that? Well, you're going to have to do the best you can. And if it's a small group, you can find out, right? Like ask people or say, like, we've received a complaint. If anyone wants to come speak to me about it. But that does, I'm not going to pretend that's not difficult, but that doesn't mean you can't investigate it, right? Anytime an employer knows or should know, they have a duty to investigate, but it's also super important that you're monitoring because again, if you have allegations of harassment, discrimination, and you can show you had a policy, you trained on it, and you monitored your workforce to make sure there were no concerns and something still came up, that's going to help you show that you're at least trying to be compliant within the workplace. Next thing, when we talk about employee monitoring, New Jersey requires written notification of use of tracking devices on any vehicles used by employees, right? So that started in 2022. And what it says is, again, you need a clear, prominent, and specific notice. So if you've got something that tracks where employees are going, if you've got one of those cameras everyone has now, but it tracks where employees are, so you know where they are, make sure that you've provided that either within your handbook or a separate document, and make sure you get an acknowledgement of that. So there's another one, you need to get that piece of paper back. And if not, if you're monitoring your employees and haven't told them, that's a penalty of $1,000 to $2,500, right? That's within the law. So again, if you're tracking devices on vehicles, now I know the question then becomes, well, what about in my office? I have a dental office and I have cameras in the hallway. Again, you want to make sure private spaces don't have cameras. And my suggestion is if you have cameras, put it in the handbook, right? That workplace is being monitored inside, outside, wherever it is. Have a sign right there, right? Camera in use. And it's there for protection of employees, for protection of employer, right? So that people know it's there. And then you can use it if something inappropriate happens. Some people don't like it, some people do. But if you use it, I think you should be clear with cameras the same way so that people understand it's there. And if someone does something wrong, they know you're going to go to the camera to see what's going on. So finally, what we want to look at is, will that monitoring help you improve the work experience for your employees, right? Will it help you identify issues? And again, if you have the complaints, you want to make sure you're monitoring early and regularly so that you can show that there's no retaliation harassment going on in the workplace. So again, what we hit on today was your wage issues. Make sure you increase your minimum wage. Make sure anyone who's working overtime More than 40 hours in 1 week, it's time and a half. If you have exempt employees, please make sure they meet that test. Beware of audits. Make sure you have a clear record of when employees are working. And again, print out that salary for your employees so you can show there's no discrimination across the board, right? And if there is someone that's a different standard, something, it's based on performance, it's based on merit, it's based on education, something that shows why. Raises and bonuses, before you give them out this year, make sure you have clear criteria, make sure you have clear policies. And if you don't have it now, you can do it at any time. That's your discretion. That's your right as you, the employer, can have the criteria for what those raises and bonuses are before you do it next year too. Maybe you want to change that. Look at your handbooks annually and make sure you get your acknowledgement and look at different policies like AI policies that you might want for next year. You've got that list, or you will have shortly, the list of required notices and acknowledgements will get over to you. Your annual evaluations, make sure that's being done before raises and promotions, and make sure you monitor that workforce. I hope everyone stays safe in this snowy weather, and please feel free to reach out to me to any questions. And again, we'll get you a copy of this recording and the PowerPoint shortly. Thank you.